we've said before, the system to recognize people is based on merit and not on birth, not on family uh, principles. It's based on merit, how a person is acting. Okay, so the um, now here it says those who engage in sense gratification are called demons, and those who spread the glorification of the Lord or satisfy the transcendental senses of the Lord are called demigods. It is specifically mentioned here that the Brahmanas are created from the face of the cosmic personality or Virat Purusha. Similarly, the Kshatriyas are said to be created from his arms, and Vaishyas are created from his waist, and the Sudras are created from his legs. The Brahmanas are especially meant for austerity, learning, and knowledge, and are averse to all kinds of sense gratification. So these few sentences are very significant in order to understand who is who. The who's who of the Vedic, let's say, knowledge uh, is necessary to know so that we don't make a mistake. So Brahmana is someone who is averse to all kinds of sense gratification. And they're especially meant for austerity, learning, and knowledge. Okay, so in order to become a Brahmana, one has to be educated properly. And that education is received from other bona fide Brahmanas. And it also says that the Brahmanas are full of mystic power and are completely averse to sense gratification. So uh, we can understand a Brahmana by the actions that the Brahmana takes and the words that the Brahmana uses. Okay, so uh, Prabhupada writes here, one occupation in the material world is sense gratification, and the other occupation is spiritual life, to satisfy the Lord by his glorification. Now, how do you glorify the Lord? Well, you glorify the Lord by uh, talking about his transcendental qualities. That requires knowledge. You have to know what those transcendental qualities are. And in order to do that, one must be free of sense gratification. Otherwise, it's difficult to always be gratifying, always be glorifying the transcendental qualities of the Lord. So, those who engage, or people who engage in sense gratification, they're considered to be demons. And those who spread the glorification of the Lord or satisfy the transcendental senses of the Lord are called demigods. So the ones who spread the glorification of the Lord, they're preachers. And those who satisfy the transcendental senses of the Lord, they're called demigods. And they usually are, no, anyway, those two things, those 2 points are important to be able to recognize who is actually bona fide. People who engage in sense gratification are demons. But those who spread the glorification of the Lord or satisfy the transcendental senses are called demigods. So the Brahmanas are supposed to spread the glorification of the Lord. And by doing that, they're able to help other people understand who Krishna is and how to please Krishna. Pleasing Krishna is the real purpose of life, because by pleasing Krishna, then Krishna reciprocates by giving the devotee knowledge and remembrance so that the devotee can speak, uh, with what you would call self-confidence. So in order to speak uh, glorification of the Lord, you have to have confidence that you're not talking nonsense, that you're actually saying things that are bona fide. Now, how to say things that are bona fide? Simply repeat what the original things that the Lord has said, and also uh, the acharyas. That's what they do. They simply repeat what the Lord has said. So if we simply repeat what Krishna has said and what the acharyas have said, we become a bona fide preacher. If we speculate and say things that is not validated by the original words of Krishna or the words of the acharyas, then we are considered to be nonsense people. So, how do you recognize a nonsense person? It's a person who does not accept the Shastras and who does not speak from the Shastras, who speculates their own type of philosophy. It's no longer philosophy, it's actually just nonsense. So there are many people that do that now, and they consider themselves pundits because they come up with new interpretations of the Vedic teaching, or they reject the Vedas altogether and just talk their own nonsense points. Now, there's a saying, he who knows nothing will accept anything. So most people in Kali Yuga don't know anything about spiritual life. Therefore, they're ready to accept anything that nonsense so-called preachers say. So we see that oftentimes uh, Christian preachers, they always hold the Bible in their hand when they preach. Uh, that's to uh, help people, uh, that's to inspire people to think that they're only speaking from the Bible. But the Bible is always closed in your hand. You know, they don't open it up usually and speak. Just like we're opening up the book and we're trying to speak from the Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam, right? The preachers usually, Christian preachers usually, hold the book in their hand and preach. So how do we know they're saying bona fide things? Well, uh, we would have to, let's say, compare what they're saying with what's in the Bible. And but most people don't do that. They just become mesmerized, meaning they become like overwhelmed by the speaking of the preacher who holds the Bible in his hand and it begins to say all kinds of things that seem to inspire the people or uh, overwhelm the people. Uh, so oftentimes, uh, the Christian preachers hold the Bible in their hand and they start speaking. But in Krishna consciousness, we don't just hold the Bhagavad Gita in our hands. We open it and simply repeat what's in the Bhagavad Gita. We don't have to manufacture anything. And that way, by repeating what's in the Bhagavad Gita, there are two things. There's the verse and there's the purport. Some people only read the purport and they don't read only read the verse and don't read the purport. That is a mistake because the purport given by Srila Prabhupada himself helps one to understand the real meaning of the verse. If you simply read the verse and don't read the purport, it's easy to be misled. It's easily to make not misled. It's easily to make mistakes. So we have to very carefully read the verse, and then we have to very carefully read the purport to understand what the verse means. We can't simply read the verse and then begin to talk about it, because we could easily make mistakes. So here it says, to expand himself in Vedic knowledge, Lord Brahma, the personified Veda, from his face created you, the Brahmanas, who are full of austerity, knowledge, and mystic power, and are averse to sense gratification. Okay, so now we have a criterion or criterions by which we can recognize who is a bona fide Brahmana and who is not a bona fide Brahmana. Bona fide Brahmanas are full of austerity, knowledge, and mystic power, and are averse to sense gratification. So that is the what you would call that's a definition of who is a Brahmana. So the main thing is to be averse to sense gratification, not to be engaged in any type of sense gratification. So therefore, a Brahmana should not be engaged in illicit sex, gambling, meat eating, intoxication, should not be sleeping too much or not sleeping enough, should have what you would call a balanced life in which they do not try and create and do not try to make the body suffer. In other words, they have to be balanced and to speak with clarity by repeating the Shastric knowledge, and also to understand the statements made by the bona fide devotees. So what are the statements made by bona fide devotees? They simply repeat the statements made in the Shastra. So when a person preaches without repeating what's in the Shastra, just like the Satguru gentleman, he says that I don't read Shastra. So you have no way of knowing what he's saying is true or false. Why? Because he just eliminated the only opportunity you have to validate if you're speaking correctly or not correctly by saying, I don't read Shastra. So that means that he's making things up according to whatever comes into his mind. So we have to avoid people like that. We should only associate with people who speak from Shastra and who also who don't only read the verses but also read the purports. If you only read the verses and avoid the purports, you can easily make mistakes about the real meaning of the verse. But if you read the purport also, then you have a much better chance of not making a mistake. Okay, so this purport today, Canto 3, Chapter 22, verse number 2. It begins by saying, The purpose of the Vedas is to propagate the transcendental knowledge of the absolute truth. Well, this is a profound statement. The Vedas are originally spoken by Narayana, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, to be able to repeat the exact words, we have to have a bona fide translation of the Bhagavad Gita. Now, there are many Bhagavad Gitas. Some are bona fide, and most are not bona fide. Therefore, Prabhupada titled Bhagavad Gita as it is, meaning he has not deviated from the original words of the Bhagavad Gita. And therefore, how do we know if a person has actually correctly understood the Bhagavad Gita? They simply repeat what Krishna tells Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. So you don't have to memorize anything. Of course, you can if you want to, but you simply repeat what Krishna tells Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. So Arjuna is the original, let's say, devotee who receives knowledge from Krishna, and Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So if we simply repeat what Krishna is telling Arjuna, then we won't be misled. Now, not only do we try to read what Krishna says to Arjuna, but we should also read the purport given by Srila Prabhupada. So now Krishna speaks to Arjuna, and we have what Krishna has originally spoken by the translation of the Sanskrit, and then we have the purport given by Srila Prabhupada to understand what it means, what the verse means. If we simply read the verses, there's a great chance that we misinterpret them and be misled and mislead others. If we read the verse translated by Srila Prabhupada and then the purport and simply repeat those things, we are a bona fide preacher. So it's not difficult to be a bona fide preacher. You can simply repeat what the verse says and repeat what the purport says. If you simply repeat what the verse says and then begin talking about it, you can easily make mistakes. So that's more or less, see, there's one thing about Bible preachers. They read the words in the Bible and then they give their interpretation. Now there are books in Christianity that try and explain what the verses in the Bible say, right? But if you only read the Bible and then begin to talk about what you think it means, it's easy to make mistakes. Now, who writes the purports to the Bible? Well, they're usually mundane people. And then, by the way, there are many Bibles. There's not just one Bible. So that's another problem. There are different versions of the Bible. So, and the different versions can have different, explanations. Therefore, we cannot say that there's a bona fide disciplic succession in Christianity. However, we can say there is bona fide disciplic succession in Krishna consciousness. Everything begins by Krishna speaking to Brahma, then Brahma speaking to Vyasadeva, and so forth. there is a disciplic succession that has not been broken. But and if it is broken, it is rejuvenated again, or it's spoken again. So in the beginning of Kali Yuga, the uh, uh, the Vedic knowledge was broken, and therefore Krishna had to speak it again to Arjuna 5,000 years ago. Okay, so this first sentence of verse number 2 says, the purpose of the Vedas is to propagate the transcendental knowledge of absolute truth. Now, there's truth and then there's absolute truth. Absolute truth means there's no mistake. And it's true in the past, it's true in the present, and it's true in the future. It is possible that there are truths that were not spoken in the past and they're spoken in the present, and maybe it was spoken in the future. So that's not absolute truth. Absolute truth is something that has never changed. It begins from it doesn't have a beginning. It has been eternally spoken. So how do we know what we're reading in a book is the absolute truth? Well, it has to come through parampara, the disciplic succession. And sometimes the disciplic succession is broken. Therefore, it's Krishna's purpose to reinvigorate it again. So at the time, 5,000 years ago, the disciplic succession was broken. That's why Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna. And then he wanted Arjuna to start the new parampara, or bona fide disciplic succession. Okay, so when there is a disciplic succession, simply repeating what the bona fide acharyas have said, and you have a way of knowing what they say is true because we have Bhagavad Gita as it is. So as long as they're repeating what's in Bhagavad Gita as it is, then they're bona fide. So it's not difficult to be a bona fide preacher in Krishna consciousness because we have Bhagavad Gita as it is, and we have the purports of Srila Prabhupada. Some people only read the verses and then give their own interpretation of the verses. But bona fide devotees will read the verse and they'll also read the purport given by Srila Prabhupada, and they will simply repeat Prabhupada's words. If we simply repeat Prabhupada's words, we don't make any mistake, and people will not be misled. Now, someone will say, "Well, that's you should have some freedom of interpretation." No, there's no freedom of interpretation in Krishna consciousness. It's simply repeating correctly the original words of Krishna and the original purports of Srila Prabhupada. Then you're a bona fide preacher. Okay, so the okay, it is in this purport. It says in Bhagavad Gita also, Lord Krishna says that all the Vedas are meant for understanding the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is especially mentioned here, Yoga Yuktan Alam Patan, that Brahmanas are full of mystic power and are completely averse to sense gratification. Well, if you see a Brahmana that's engaged in sense gratification, then you know that they're not a Brahmana. Brahmanas are full of mystic power and are completely averse to sense gratification. What is sense gratification? gratifying the senses rather than glorifying the Lord. So someone who gratifies the senses by meat eating, gambling, illicit sex, intoxication, so forth. So such a person who has those bad habits cannot speak Shastra because they're contaminated. One has to be pure to be able to speak the Shastra. And pure means pure in mind, body, and body. And the mind should not have any uh, thoughts of sense gratification. And the body should be always engaged in devotional service. Okay, so uh, also it says that Brahmanas are full of mystic power and are completely averse to sense gratification. Well, that gives you an idea how to become bona fide. You have to give up all sense gratification. Then you can be a genuine Brahmana, and Brahmanas are full of mystic power and are completely averse to sense gratification. So that's what the training in Krishna consciousness is. You have to give up meat eating, gambling, illicit sex, intoxication, and take up chanting Hare Krishna every day, 16 good rounds. It can be more also. And eating only prasadam and hearing regularly 2 or 3 times a day Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, going on Sankirtan, and repeating and chanting, of course, Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And in this way, one becomes more than a Brahmana. They become a Vaishnava. Brahmanas, yes, there are Brahmanas, and it is they're in the mode of goodness, but Vaishnavas are transcendental, even to Brahmanas. Why? Because they are not performing, let's say, rituals for material benefit. They're simply chanting Hare Krishna and repeating what's in Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. So the Brahmanas, they're so-called experts at performing rituals. But a Vaishnava is not engaged in performing rituals. And sometimes Vaishnavas are criticized for not doing that. The only time we perform rituals is maybe a marriage ceremony, right? But most of the time, bona fide Krishna conscious Brahmanas are preaching and doing Sankirtan and repeating words in the Bhagavad Gita as it is in class. So they're more interested in giving knowledge than in performing rituals. So you'll see if you go to uh, you want to go to a ceremony performed by Brahmanas, most of the ceremony, if not all, is simply repeating, uh, uh, repeating shastras in Sanskrit. And then, as far as explanation of what was, you know, spoken, is usually little bit, not too much explanation. So most of the time, you just hear the Brahmanas saying mantras in Sanskrit. So you just sit there patiently waiting to see if the Brahmana is going to give some explanation or not. Many times they don't give any explanation; they just say the mantras. So it's very difficult for a person to be educated in Shastra, and it's also difficult to determine if the person is speaking shastrically or not speaking shastrically. You don't really know. They could be saying almost anything in Sanskrit, and if you're not an expert in Sanskrit, you don't know what they're saying. So therefore, it's important to hear from bona fide devotees who simply repeat what's in the bona fide shastras and the bona fide purports. Then you actually learn something, and you're able also to judge if another person is speaking the truth or is talking nonsense, because you've been trained to know what the verse means, and by also knowing what the correct purport to that verse is. So that's why Prabhupada first gives the Sanskrit, then the transliteration of the Sanskrit in the English alphabet, and then the word for word meanings, and then the translation itself, and then the purport. So now we have a very good chance of correctly understanding what the verse means. And you see, sometimes, you just see the verse and you don't see any word for word, and you don't see, and and then you have a translation, but there's no purport. But see, Prabhupada, he gives the original verse, then he gives the word for word translation of the Sanskrit. He has the original Sanskrit, then the English version of that verse. In other words, he's translating the verse into English, and then the word for word meanings, and then the translation, and then the purport. So now you have a chance to analyze the word for word translation of the Sanskrit words, and then analyze the translation, and then analyze the purport. And also, if you know Sanskrit, he gives you the Sanskrit also. So this way, Prabhupada is giving you bona fide knowledge, and you have a chance to verify it because he's giving the original verse, the transliteration of the verse in English, the word for word meanings of the verse, and the translation of the verse and the purport of the verse. So this says bona fide Shastra. Therefore, we should very carefully read the Sanskrit and the word for word meaning of the Sanskrit verse, and then the translation of it, and then the purport. Then we become very well situated in Vedic knowledge. That's why Prabhupada went to all the trouble to give this way of presentation of the Vedic knowledge. He not only gives the original Sanskrit verse, he gives the transliteration of it in English. So if you don't understand Sanskrit, you can repeat it with the transliteration. And then the word for word meaning uh, from Sanskrit into English, and then the translation, and then the purport. You see how much trouble Prabhupada went to make sure that what he's giving you is the truth and is bona fide. That requires a lot of work, you say. And it took a long time for Prabhupada to do this. And he spent many, many hours while we were sleeping to write to translate and to write his purports. And his purports, Prabhupada said the purports are his spiritual ecstasies. And that's a fact. They are, the purports are actually ecstatic because you feel very, let's say, inspired by reading the purports. Now you really understand what the verses say, and you have a way of validating it because the original Sanskrit is there, the transliteration of the Sanskrit is there, the word for word meanings are there, and then the translation of the verse, and then the purport of the verse. So you have right in front of you the ability to validate if this is correct or not. Okay, so now we are, let's see, uh, we read verse number 1. Now we go to verse number 2. We did 2?
Yeah, 2 is 3.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, we're on 3. Manu replied, to expand himself in Vedic knowledge, Lord Brahma, the personified Veda, from his face created you, the Brahmanas.
No, that we read that.
Okay, we read on text 3. For the protection of the Brahmanas, the thousand-legged supreme being created us, the Kshatriyas, from his 1,000 arms. Hence, the Brahmanas are said to be his heart, and the Kshatriyas his arms. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Kshatriyas are specifically meant to maintain the Brahmanas, because if the Brahmanas are protected, then the head of civilization is protected. Brahmanas are supposed to be the head of the social body. If the head is clear and has not gone mad or crazy, then everything is in proper position. The Lord is described thus: Namo Brahmanya Devaya Go Brahmana Hitayacha. The purport of this prayer is that the Lord is specifically that the Lord specifically protects the Brahmanas and the cows, and then he protects all other members of society. Jagat Ditaya. It is his will that universal welfare work depends on the protection of cows and Brahmanas. Thus, Brahminical culture and cow protection are the basic principles for human civilization. Kshatriyas are especially meant to protect the Brahmanas, as is the supreme will of the Lord. Go Brahmana Hitayacha. As within the body, the heart is a very important part, so the Brahmanas are also the important element in human society. The Kshatriyas are more like the whole body. Even though the whole body is bigger than the heart is more important. Okay, so then if I'm not mistaken, okay, so the Kshatriyas are supposed to protect Brahmanas. When the Brahmanas are protected, then they are able to preach and help everyone in the society, to help all people, not just one class of people. Like, for example, there are some Vaishnavas that only let's say, preach and educate their sons and not the mass of people. That's not good. Well, Prabhupada came and he instructed everybody. He didn't say, I'm only going to teach my Brahmana disciples and not anybody else. However, in India, it's more or less the Vedic knowledge is given only to the children of Brahmanas. And the Brahmanas also have and Sanskrit is not taught to the mass of people. It's only taught to the children of brahmanas. So in that way, there's this what you would call uh, uh, the um, class differentiation uh, happens, and so the Sudras don't get any education at all, and the Vaishyas get a little bit of education, and the Brahmanas children get a lot of education. Now, what happened in modern times is that the children of Brahmanas, although they got educated, they also started working and taking jobs away from other people. Whereas before, the Brahmanas would only do Brahminical things. But in modern times, uh, they're they're trained to be Brahmanas, but then they take jobs away from the normal people, and then normal people get upset because uh, the Brahmanas normally would not take jobs, would not work. They would simply teach and help people understand the shastras. So here we see the breakdown of that whole original Vedic system in modern times, mainly because of the deviation of the Brahmanas. Their sons and daughters, they go to school, they get good education, and then they get jobs, whereas they're not doing what they're supposed to do. As being in the family of Brahmanas, you're supposed to be able to know the Vedas and teach it to others. But now they're taking jobs away from other people, and therefore there's animosity between the normal people and the Brahmanas now in India, especially because the Brahmanas are taking jobs away from the normal people, and they get upset, and so there's a lot of hatred of Brahmanas in some parts of India. Huh?
Many parts.
Many what?
Many parts.
Many parts, yeah.
But now they have started teaching. In some schools they have started for normal people also.
Teaching the normal people Vedic knowledge. So they're not taking away jobs.
They are taking away jobs.
I mean, no, the Brahmanas are meant to be teachers and to live, simple life and to teach freely, basically. But we see that the kids of the Brahmanas, although they were trained maybe to be Brahmanas, but they're taking away jobs from the normal people, and then there's a lot of animosity due to that. And there are places in India where Brahmanas are hated, right? And they're why? Because they're not doing what they're supposed to do. They're not supposed to take jobs away from the normal people. They're supposed to have Brahminical, be Brahminical all the time. And what do Brahmanas do? There's 6 things they can do. They can um, basically they're meant to teach other people Krishna consciousness. That's the main thing that they're supposed to do. And if they deviate from that and start taking jobs away from normal people, that only creates animosity. And now that's why there are parts of India where Brahmanas are not respected at all, because they're not acting as real Brahmanas. Okay. So here we're on verse number 4. For the protection of the Brahmanas, the 1,000-legged supreme being created us, created us, the Kshatriyas, from his 1,000 arms. Hence, the Brahmanas are said to be his heart, and the Kshatriyas his arms. Purport: Kshatriyas are specifically meant to maintain the Brahmanas because if the Brahmanas are protected, then the head of civilization is protected. Brahmanas are supposed to be the head of the social body. If the head is clear and has not gone mad, then everything is in proper position. The Lord is described thus: Namo Brahmanya Devaya Go Brahmanahitaya. The purport of this prayer is that the Lord specifically protects the Brahmanas and the cows, and then he protects all other members of society. Jagatitaya. It is his will that universal welfare work depends on the protection of cows and Brahmanas. Thus, Brahminical culture and cow protection are the basic principles for human society. So now we see how far away things are now from the original Vedic program. Nowadays, you have Brahmanas that are working and not doing what they're supposed to do. And you have massive killing of cows and people eating cows. So there's no wonder that there's so much misery in the world today. And also, people are not being protected because Kshatriyas are especially meant to protect the Brahmanas, as is the supreme will of the Lord. Go Brahmana Hitayacha. But they're not actually protecting the Brahmanas anymore. As within the body, the heart is very important part. So the Brahmanas are also the important element in human society. The Kshatriyas are more like the whole body. Even though the whole body is bigger than the heart is more important. So to have bona fide Brahmanas in Kali Yuga is very rare. And what is a Brahmana? First of all, a Brahmana has a vow of poverty. What does that mean? Well, Brahmanas can receive great wealth, but they distribute it to the people. They don't hold on to it. They don't, amass millions of dollars in the bank. They distribute millions of dollars if they receive that much to help the general population. And this is a problem why this creates class let's say violence. When rich people just keep getting richer and poor people keep getting poorer, then there's going to be revolution. Just like the French Revolution. The French Revolution, the rich got richer and the poor got poorer, but the mass of people are poor, and there's just a small number of rich people. So they decided to kill rich people. So if you look at the French Revolution, they grabbed all these rich people and killed them, cut their heads off. They had a guillotine. Guillotine is this very sharp blade, and it comes down really fast. And they hold people in a certain way, and the blade comes down and cuts their head off, and their head falls off their body. Right. So the French, Sudras, they revolted and they cut off the heads of the rich people. They hated them because they were just uh, getting more and more rich and avoiding the poor people. So that can happen anytime. Like, for example, you can look this up. In America, Black people have revolted and started burning down buildings and killing people. Why? Because they were not given a chance of good education and not given a chance to get good jobs. So they revolted in the 1960s. They were, burning down stores and shooting. There was also shooting going on. It looked like it was a revolution, especially in the big cities like Detroit and New York and Los Angeles, Philadelphia. There was like war going on in the 1960s for a certain period of time, right in the United States. Why? Because most of the black people were living in ghettos, black neighborhoods, and their schools were not good, and the many people were poor and not getting good education and not getting good jobs, so they revolted. So then, the government tried to uh, change that by giving a lot of welfare to the blacks. So, and also stopping the segregated schools. So there were schools for black uh, students and there were schools for white students. So now they forced white students to go into black schools, and they had they tried to stop the segregation by busing white students into black neighborhoods. Uh, you can look that up. You can look that up.
I think that so apparently, I mean, this black uh, rebellion or black movement has been going on for a while, but the specific one is the 1950s was the Montgomery bus boycott, sparked by Rosa Parks' refusal to give up her seat.
Well, black people had to sit in the back, and front people sat in front of the bus.
That bus is there in the Ford Museum, Maharaj, in Detroit.
Uh-huh. Yeah, well, I mean, there was segregation. In other words, blacks had their neighborhood, whites had their neighborhood. And blacks had their schools, whites had their schools. So even though the Civil War was fought in the United States, and by the way, the biggest number of deaths of the Army was the Civil War. And I mean, America has been in many wars around the world. The greatest number of deaths took place in the Civil War, where Americans were killing Americans. And over 500,000 Americans died in the Civil War, where you had the South fighting the North. The South had slaves, and the North didn't have slaves, or they might have had a few, but not many. So there was this war that took place ostensibly to free the black people from slavery in the South. There were other reasons also. So eventually the North won the war, and now the slaves were freed. But they were not really freed. They ended up in ghettos, which were, where the schools were not so good, and the public services were not so good, and people were living not as opulently as the white people were. There were segregated, neighborhoods, black neighborhoods, white neighborhoods, and so forth. So then there was also, an uprising. And then the government tried to change things by forcing white kids to be bused to black uh, neighborhood schools and a whole bunch of different things and a lot of welfare given to the blacks and so forth to avoid a revolution.
Are they ghetto rights, Maharaj? 1964 to 69.
Yeah.
Oh.
What's it say?
The term ghetto riots, also termed ghetto rebellions, race riots, or Negro riots, refers to summer social unrest across the United States in the middle to late 1960s, characterized by African American groups using violent tactics.
I think you're talking about Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Voting Rights Act of 1965, Maharaj? Or?
I'm talking about, yeah, in the 1960s, there was a lot of,
Unrest.
uprising of the blacks. Because although the Civil War was fought to free the blacks, still by the 1960s, they were still segregated in many places. They still had lesser opportunities for education and for learning. I mean, education and jobs. So there was an uprising.
Yeah. There was also some kind of more militant.
Yeah, it was called the
Harlem right of things.
yeah, what was the name of those people? Anyway, I forget. There were militant blacks that started having guns.
Malcolm X.
Yeah, Malcolm X.
Black Panthers.
Black Panthers, that's it, the Black Panthers. And they were militant blacks that wanted to have a revolution. They were quickly eliminated by the police and the army. Although the army normally is not allowed to function inside the United States, it's only for the outside the United States. But sometimes, in very bad situations, not the army, but the state, let's say, army, can I mean, normally it's not allowed to come into the cities with tanks and bombs and things like that. But you do have state militias, and they can protect the states. But in the 1960s, the situation was so bad that the army did get involved. Although normally they're not allowed to, get involved in problems inside the United States. They're only meant for the outside the United States. But there were some times that the army did get involved in some places. That's how serious the situation was. Okay, so I think we're finished now. And okay, so your homework is to find out or write a little bit about the uh, Black Panthers. Find out who they were and what they were doing. Black Panthers. Okay, thank you very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki. No questions, right?
Any questions, Arman? No. Mataji, you were saying something about National Guard. Was that related to?
Yeah, National Guard is basically every state has a National Guard. That is to protect that state. So it's like an army,
Yeah.
but it's an internal army. And then there's the regular army to protect the United States, and they go also to other countries, get into a war. But the National Guard is the particular army of a state.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, so the homework is look up what
Black
is
Panther.
Black Panthers. Okay, thank you very much. So we're on what? Text 4?
4 we have to cover from